My first job in the hotel industry was as a bellman at the Fairmont Hotel in San Francisco.
I was 13 and I went to work as a kitchen porter at the Kensington Palace Hotel in London.
My first job was washing plates in my father's restaurant.
Washing cars when I was 12 years old for Budget Rent-A-Car.
I worked for a restaurant chain in Rochester, New York.
And I was a producer, cinematographer, editor for 3 years after graduation.
I started before when I was a junior high, working in a restaurant, doing all kinds of jobs.
You want me to start at the really beginning in 1961?
When I had to think about what I wanted to do, it was always going to be something related to restaurants. The people that I felt comfortable at that stage of my career to go to and talk, etc., was my uncle. I had a lot of respect for him. He wasn't in the industry, but he was just one of those guys that asked the right questions and you got a little bit of clarity. The person knows what to do. It's just that you've got to ask them the right questions so they find it out for themselves.
I've been fortunate there have been people along the way who I've learned from. And not specifically because they've sat me down and said, you need to do it this way or that way, but by following them, by watching them, by listening to them.
I think the best advice that I received was to always focus on the current job you're doing and never look at the next step in your career. And if you do what you're doing today well, you will get recognized, people will notice it, and the rest will fall into place.
My greatest mentor has been Izzy Sharp, the founder of Four Seasons. He continued to remind me that I should always try to focus on being myself. Not change because the world was trying to change me, not change because the job was changing, not change because I was becoming a more senior executive.
If I look along the journey which has been my career so far, and I think back, there are a few people who have stayed with me as sort of constants who I've gone back to. People who have been genuine and people I've respected and people who have had a high level of integrity, people who aren't afraid to not always tell you what you want to hear.
He said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "I want your job." And he said, "Well, you got a choice. I can put you in a hotel and make you London's youngest hotel manager, or you can come in at the bottom at the corporate office." And that was really the first mentoring I had. I didn't know it was mentoring. It was more like being beaten with a stick. But he gave me that first chance of finding out that I wasn't quite as dumb as I thought I was.
When I'm seeking advice, it's about trying to get a perspective.
People I turn to the most to seek out advice are not the people you would think. They're not the people in my life that are well organized, ultra successful. They're people that I know, people that have been through chaos and have survived. In that way, they're very inspiring because they show me that there is a light at the end of the tunnel and it's not always a train.
I do have an eclectic sort of group of advisors around me, but it wasn't until later in my career that I realized that there was nothing wrong with that. Taking advice from, a fashion designer and a banker and a journalist and a horse trainer, it's important that you do listen to those different perspectives because they all give you a little different insight to the issue or to the problem. I think if you always receive the same type of advice or from a consistent group of people, or if they were all professionals in the same way, you wouldn't have the richness of the variety of the thinking.
I like starting off with facts rather than the gut feeling, because the gut feeling is I have the idea and now I want to go with it, where the facts sometimes will surface something that you think, I didn't think of it like that.
For me, the role of gut in my decision-making plays actually a very important role, and I know it's very hard to define gut. What is gut? Is gut the muscle memory of your experience you gain over time by making right and wrong decisions along your career, and then after 25 years you suddenly realize what comes intuitive is actually the result of past experience?
gut instinct can be honed. It's not something that just sits there and percolates without some prodding. And so I often trust my gut, but again, I think that you have to balance that with experience.
The older I get, the more I can rely on everything I've learned in my life bubbling up subconsciously.
I think that you can learn to give advice. I think the important thing to remember is that you need to learn how to do it. It's not the same as giving direction. It's not the same as telling people what to do or telling people what you would do if you were them.
It's important to stop and ask a couple of questions and really try and understand the goals and the objectives and the conflicts of the person who's seeking the advice.
Make sure that it's not all about you. It's the old cliche, and I'm hesitant to use this term, but it truly works. You have to create win-win situations.
There's two types of advice. Professional advice is dead easy. You know something, you can impart it. Some people impart it well, some people don't. Personal advice, career advice, advice on love, life, laughter, that's something you have to be empathetic towards to really, otherwise it's not sincere. It has to come naturally.
I think the best on-the-job training for giving advice is being a parent, because that clearly is perhaps the most important advice that any individual can provide.
I think one of the important things to be successful is to understand what you don't know and understand where to go to fill that in.
To go and bounce something off someone or ask for advice when you don't know. I think sometimes as leaders, we're just too proud to say, I've never dealt with this before. Have you dealt with something like this? Is there any advice you can give me?
It doesn't necessarily mean that the people that are filling it in are absolutely correct. And so you have to sift through what you're getting for advice and then make a decision based upon your experience, what you think is the best way to go.
I think that someone who insists on doing it on their own and not being open to advice is going to ultimately be a failure.
Ultimately, you can't be successful if you don't respect that other people have knowledge that they can impart to you as a person and that you can use to be more effective.
The adage being lonely at the top, I think that some days that is the case. I don't think that's a general statement, because I think that first of all, if you have done a good job of surrounding yourself with these like-hearted people, no one ever wants you to be lonely. And people want to share together in the experiences, good and bad, as a unit, as a team.
And you've got to think of yourself as part of that team. And you've got to be able to show them that you're human, and sometimes say, look, let's talk about this. But it isn't lonely. You can make it very lonely.
I think it can be lonely at the top, and I do think that sort of too much loneliness at the top can result in you just losing relevance to the world around you.
Eventually, you are the ultimate decision maker, and at times that can be lonely, and at times those decisions aren't popular, and they can change the course and the context of the conversation, and that will change the direction of the organization. But it's the leading up to that moment where you have to make the decision that you really have to depend on the advice of the people that you have surrounded yourself with.
But if you ensure that there are always open communication channels, that you are approachable, that you are humble, and that you stay in touch with everybody within the organization, it doesn't get lonely at all.
The DNA of a good advisor, I would say 1, they're inquisitive. 2, they're a very good listener.
You have to have the ability to listen. Very important. A lot of people don't listen anymore.
3, they're impartial.
If you're going to give advice, give it objectively and in an unbiased way.
And I would say 4, that they're consistent. They stay with you, that they're loyal. The power of advice, to me, is taking someone beyond where they are, where they think they can be.
The power of advice is in its ability to make someone think outside of their perspective that they have.
Often I think the very best advice I've received is from people who have sort of no interest whatsoever in the outcome, people who have nothing to gain whatsoever and are genuinely, value a friendship to want to share with you what they think.
It's all about the man or woman who needs the advice, who's willing to listen, who can digest and then use what they have been told to make themselves even stronger, to make themselves better.
And to always focus on the quality of your people, because the best people attract the best people.
Always tell the truth, and if you don't know the answer, don't guess.
Do what makes you happy, but whatever you do, do it to the best of your ability.
This is one thing to get an advice, it's completely another to listen to that advice.
And she said to me once, Stephen, remember, always leave things better than you found them.
Advice is a part of what you get from people. It's part of the food that feeds you. Without it, you're alone.